this is one of the key issues, this forest fragmentation that's going to occur with the Marcellus. This is one of the key issues that you really can't mitigate against. You could potentially do something about avoiding spills. You could potentially do something about well casings to avoid contaminated groundwater supplies. There's air pollution interception that could occur that you could reduce the amount of air pollution associated with the Marcellus. But how are you going to mitigate with a dispersed industrial activity across the region? How are you going to mitigate against the edge effects? You can't. Okay, this is autumn olive, which is a native of Asia, and what you'll find is that it'll infest areas where there's a lot of edge, a lot of sunlight. What happens is the birds eat the seeds. The birds will land on that first row of trees on the edge, the forest edge, and then of course they'll defecate and you'll have autumn olive pop up. But what's insidious is now you've got autumn olive established in the edge, and it'll start to migrate, and I don't know if you can capture it on the film here, but it starts to migrate into the forest. So autumn olive starts to move into the forest. Now, how are you going to mitigate against this? You can perhaps treat it initially, and you'll find this in a lot of specifications on places that are more progressive. They'll say, okay, we need to treat the autumn olive for 2 years after disturbance. Well, that's great, but you still have that edge effect. What happens that third, that fourth year when the birds come back in and they reseed autumn olive? And then it's out of control. And again, it's a concept of biological pollution. Once it gets established, it's going to propagate itself. You're going to have seed spread. You're going to have more autumn olive. And this is just one example of a whole list of species that favor these edge habitats that are invasive. And there is not going to be any mitigation of this in the long term with the Marcellus. These are going to change the composition of our Pennsylvania forests and directly inhibit regeneration. To give you an example, a tangible example of how autumn olive specifically can impact that. It's a study that was done out in Chicago area, and autumn olive has a direct impact on the nesting success of one of our native species, the American robin. Okay, you say, well, how does that happen? Well, autumn olive has a different branching structure than some of our native species, such as hawthorn, that it displaces. The robins tend to favor the autumn olive because of the branching structure. This was found out, and they tend to nest closer to the ground. Well, that's great, you would say. It's great habitat for robins. They love to nest in it. But then when you look at the nesting success, those nests are closer to the ground in the autumn olive. They have a higher rate of predation from things like possums, raccoons, some of the what they call mesopredators, the smaller predators that also favor edge impacts. But because the nests are closer to the ground, the robins have a lower nesting success. So that's something that's one of those cascading impacts ecologically that we don't understand. A lot of these invasives also change the forest understory. The more fragmentation you have, the more disruption in the forest understory. You're going to have more light penetration, you're going to have less moisture. The amphibian population crashes. They cannot tolerate the edge effects like some species can. So you will not have the same kind of amphibian populations.